On a recovery. On a recovery. Not subsidy. You pay for the recovery. Hello? I've finished. My paragraph 6 is an outline of a typical contract. Typical PPP contract. That contract must have that contract must have the agreement. The agreement is that whereas those are part of the contract, it must have it. Then it must cover the project, what the project is. It must talk about the scope of the project. It must talk about project consideration and completion. It must talk about project cost. It must talk about method of financing. What quantity of it is debt? What quantity is equity? How is it going to be paid? We'll talk about the term. We'll talk about the contract document. What are the contract documents? Is listed there. We'll talk about mutual covenants. What am I supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? We'll talk about, then the second segment is conditions of contract, where all these obligations outside of the agreement itself, the supporting condition of contract, where all these things will be listed. This is typically what makes up a PPP agreement. And so I called it pro forma contract. In conclusion, as a value for money proposition has always been a core driver of government PPP policy. PPP policy where we've adopted, where this is likely to result in better value and more affordable services. Federal government power reform program was basically driven by these efforts. However, typical of most policies in Nigeria, implementation has suffered severe hiccups. Government had established an electricity bulk trader to obtake all electricity produced by GENCOs via power purchase agreement. There are so many variants of BOT employed. PPP arrangements remain the major route or route for bridging the current infrastructure gap in our country. But for it to deliver, the ICRC Act should be amended to empower ICRC to operate effectively as a regulator. The provisions of the national policy on public sector partnership or public and private sector partnership should be implemented to the letter, and lessons learned should be deployed to service future projects. Political interference should be limited, and economic and social performance output should be emphasized. People of God, value for money remains the name of the game any day. God bless you.
Thank you very much, sir. Can we please give him another round of applause? Well, I'm sorry I could not stop. Because I gave him 40 minutes. And he spent 55 minutes. And even me, I was hell-bound that I couldn't even get up to give him 5 minutes more. Because it's like he should just continue. I'm sure you'll enjoy the session, right? Can we give him another round of applause? QS Ifeanyi Anago, barrister, is anybody's delight any day if it comes to presentation. And he has done justice to the paper once again. And is a very loaded paper. And my advice is that we should hold this paper dear to our heart. We've not had it. I'm sure by the time we take the second one, we will know that we have a full bouquet today to go away with, because we have very eminent people who are seated here who will really do justice. But let me just give us a short overview. It started with a short anecdote or a story about value for money, which to drive home the point of value for money. And yesterday too, we learned so much about the issue of value for money, which essentially is the bedrock of the function of a quantity surveyor. These days, it's not just to carry the tag quantity surveyor, but what are you offering on the table? What are you putting on the table? What are you providing to the client? And the essence of our services is value for money for the client. And that he was able to tell us. We, of course, moving into the paper itself, it started off with the ICRC, which is the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission Act. And I believe we should, if possible, we should have a copy of that so that we will be able to know into details what that act talks about when you are talking about PPP. Because that's the way to go now when you are talking about infrastructure. I said yesterday, Nigeria right now is grappling with the issue of infrastructure deficit. And the only way government, as we speak, cannot fund all the infrastructure facilities that we have in this country. It's not possible. Lagos-Ibadan Expressway has been there for how many years? So many other facilities, all the airports, they are in dilapidated states in the country. I talked about Stadia yesterday. So these are facilities that in advanced countries, when we go there, we enjoy going there. We enjoy seeing those facilities in their current state. They are working. They are optimally functional. But here, we are having challenges. So we need to look at that act. And in the whole paper itself, it broke down the spectrum of the PPP and talking about service contract, the management contract, lease contract, concession, and all that. And all the different variants of BOT, we have BOO, and all that. Some of us, we need to really see the definitions of all these kind of agreements, which can be applicable in PPP arrangements. And then the project itself, which is, it told us that PPP, for it to work effectively, even ICRC emphasized that it must be on a structured model. And the way to do that, of course, you must have the project procurement phase and the implementation phase. He tried to explain all that to us. And then the key issues there, which are the matters arising. Those are the interesting part of it, of the paper. And in that area, he was able to give us what I can call the case studies. And this I would really want us to look at to see practical examples of PPP arrangements where they fail and the ones that failed among them. He mentioned the MM2, which we are familiar with, and the major problem and the dispute areas, why they are having problems. And he emphasized by telling us that for all arrangements or agreements, as a consultant, we must ensure that we interrogate all the clauses and conditions. Make sure you check every detail. Cross all the T's and dot all the I's to ensure that it's not when the project that you will now come back to say, please, let me review certain clauses. It doesn't work that way. So that's a takeaway for us. If you are one to be a consultant, a transaction advisor on any of the PPP, ensure you interrogate all the agreement clauses. Then he mentioned another example, which is a port. Right now, I'm sure we are aware of the challenges we are having there. And then he mentioned the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway and several power projects that are in different stages of agreement. Then, of course, the specific challenges that he had. Honestly, I need to let you know, this paper is so rich. You really need to go and sit down to study and every details of this paper. For anyone who is seated here, just consider yourself lucky for being here as one of the audience for QS Ifeanyi Anago. And conclusion, he gave us his recommendation why ICRC Act should be amended, and so many other beautiful points which you can look at. I'm sure we're going to have question and answer session, which will be a session for us to be able to ask him specific questions So I would just advise for those who have written down their questions, just get your questions. You will be here to come and talk to us again. Just jot down your questions without wasting time so that we can move on straight on. But I'm going to end up again by asking for another round of applause for QS Ifeanyi Anago. Sir, thank you very much for that beautiful paper. Thank you so much. God bless you, sir. We're going to move on straight to the second paper. Please fasten your seatbelt again. Get ready for another. You're going to take off with another one who is seated here with us. And is the Deputy President of the Nigerian Institute of Quantity Surveyors. He flew in all the way from Abuja, so for you to know how important this event is to us. And I'm talking about my dear friend, U.S. Mohamed Habator, who is here. Can you please give him, usher him to the podium with a round of applause. The title of the paper is Roles of Stakeholders in the Implementation of Partnership Participation in Infrastructure Provision in Nigeria. He has 40 minutes too, and I hope I'll be able to bring him to 40 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, the leadership of the chapter, the elders in our profession, the resource persons here present. I've been working with QS GDOK for quite a while now, and he has really described the MC-ship in the whole system, that whenever he is not there, you find out that something is missing. So it's not surprising now that he has pepped up the tail end of this event. Having said that, I want to stand on everything eminently established by my predecessors. I believe the slides are there. In the abstract, we said provision of social and economic infrastructure is majorly the cardinal responsibility of governments at federal, states, and local government levels. That is settled. It is for them to provide. However, due to paucity of funds in recent years occasioned by dwindling oil revenue and other pressing demands, government is prioritizing other options of infrastructure financing such as public-private partnership. But the key word here is that the success of any PPP project depends to a great extent on the roles played by various stakeholders, which is really the anchor of this paper. The various avenues or models of government financing of infrastructure will be discussed later on. We shall come across them. Suffice to also say that the roles to be played by those stakeholders can be positive or negative. They can either be productive or destructive in nature. So the coloration of those roles will go a long way in ensuring whether the PPP project will succeed or not. The issue of Aja Lane we raised severally here can be traced back to roles of stakeholders in the whole gamut of the PPP arrangement. If the residents or the end users were carried along at the point of drafting the agreements, their concerns or interests must have been factored in. And that is key. So that is why need assessments are important. When you don't run it, the residents or the end users may not take ownership of whatever you are bringing on. So in that case, it will be very difficult for you to compel them to abide with their own rules and regulations. So that is why this paper is very, very crucial to the whole success of PPP projects. An outline dictionary defines partnership as an association of two or more people to conduct a business. The key word there is business. They are here to conduct business. And the same dictionary defines association as a group of persons associated for a common purpose. I need to emphasize that PPP is coming in because the government is looking up to the private sector to come in with their skills, competencies, capacities finances, and efficiency in running business. Government might not have that in stock, so they have to leverage upon those competencies owned by the private sector so that the two can deliver infrastructure successfully and effectively. It is important for me to point out at this point that PPP is not only in engineering infrastructure, be it social or economic, but PPP can also come in terms of capacity building, in terms of social services, and other areas that are not infrastructure, hard to use the languages of my previous presenters. So it can come in, the private sector and the public can team up to build capacities of their employees or members of general public. Employment generation is key. If you recall, the last Young QS Forum or QS job fair we had in Port Harcourt was a partnership between NIQS and the state government. The state government called us to look at the concept of what we had to come up with. They said, actually they are interested. They have a whole ministry charged with that responsibility. So if you want to do that, we are keen, we are also interested. But then, rather than focusing on quantity surveillance alone, we want to bring in all manners of professionals for them to gain employment. And we accept it. So what is that? It is a partnership between the state government and the private sector NIQS to push through that. So what I'm struggling to say is that let us not go home with the thinking that PPP only focuses on engineering infrastructure. No, it can come in any other areas. I think it's settled. Under introduction again, the paper will focus more on roles of stakeholders in provision of infrastructure. That is, the paper as you have in the program has been amended a bit with the approval of the chairman in council. So the paper should read roles of stakeholders in provisions of infrastructure through public-private partnership projects. That is the topic. Now, government, we've already said, has cardinal responsibility of providing infrastructure. But then, we want to state here clearly that there is a correlation between provision of infrastructure and economic development of any nation. Fail or refuse to provide engineering infrastructure, you may not be developing at the pace of other industrialized countries. That is settled. There is also, researchers have shown in United Arab Emirates, there is a correlation between the happiness and well-being of the citizenry and the level of economic development. The more robust and economic prosperity members of citizens are enjoying, the more happier they will be. And in that case, it is very easy for you to mobilize and sensitize the populace to key into government projects and programs. It's settled. So it is here very important for our politicians to understand that if you want the citizens to be happy, then work on economic prosperity. You cannot work on economic prosperity unless you sink in enough funds into infrastructure development. If you don't have the funds through the routine or traditional budgetary provision, then look towards the directions of PPP projects. Next slide. A lot have been shared by my predecessors on types of infrastructure: economic infrastructure and social infrastructure. So I don't need to overlabor that. But it is important for us to say that funding of projects through PPP or provision of infrastructure through PPP is not a Father Christmas thing at all. Right? Now, it all means is that you have infrastructure gap. And we have settled that infrastructure is key to economic development. If that is the case, supposing the government through routine budgetary provision may take 50 years to provide certain high impact infrastructure. But by leveraging on PPP, they can fast track and move in nearer. To that extent, it has the advantage. But be it known to all of us seated here and those people outside, that all projects provided through PPP must be paid in one way or the other, either by the public authorities that are providing the provisions or the general public. One way or the other, it must be paid by either the citizens through their usages or by the public. So, to that extent, the business plans or the economic viability of the scheme must be critically scrutinized as at the point of consummating it. Why? Because the private investor has the primary objective of maximizing his returns. So to that extent, if he can capitalize on the low capacity of public negotiators, he will capitalize on that and ensure he rips us up. So my senior has emphasized over and over again that as at the point of negotiation, the government should not only rely on the internal capacities of public servants, but also outsource it to ensure that people who are technically and managerially capacitated should now lead the negotiation process for the government. If that is not done, then a repetition of coming back to look at PPP contracts over and over again will be there. And we shall see later in the paper that as you continue doing that, the confidence and trust of the international community in our PPP scheme will be eroded with time. And don't forget that the bulk of funding of PPP must come from outside. It cannot be sourced within at the commercial interest rate, commercial bank interest rate of over 20 to 30%. That wouldn't work. Once if you do that, then the viability will shake. So the bankability of your feasibility presentation must be anchored on that aspect. And it is incumbent upon the government negotiators to scrutinize very well so as to get what? Value for money for the public. It is also very, very important that my predecessor, QS Hakim Smith, has said much on it, so much on it, so I wouldn't waste much time. And I've emphasized that PPP will come into fund projects other than engineering infrastructure. Modes of infrastructure financing, there are so many methods, you can see it. Divestment from public infrastructure through commercialization and privatization. Most of us are old enough to recall that. That was during the era of, during IBB or CORE or so. A lot of that happened, privatization and commercialization. Grants from international development partners and donor agencies. This is one area where particularly the state governments are not taking optimum advantage of. A lot of funders outside there are looking for where to put their money, this time around, not only for profit taking, but they want to help humanity. They are there. If we don't have them around in our culture, that doesn't mean it's not existing outside the country. In Europe, in America, there are people who set a foundation to help the citizens anywhere they could be. But for you to access that, there are some requirements and preconditions for you to meet. Most of our leadership are not prepared to meet those conditions. So that is why the level of access of grants from international partners and donor agencies are not well pronounced, but they are there. Loans and credit from development finance institutions such as World Bank, International Monetary Funds, African Development Bank are the way to go, because they have very, very low rates, from 3%, single digit in most cases. That is the way to go. You cannot borrow from the local markets, from local banks at 20, 30% and expect to run a successful program even for the state. Infrastructure bonds backed by sovereign government papers, loans and credit from commercial banks. You still know that some state governments approach banks for such loans. It is all over the places. State governments even borrow money to pay staff salaries. All right. Now, private equity financing, listed infrastructure, philanthropy organizations, and not-for-profit funding, etc. And number 9, public-private partnership. And that is where our paper is focused more on, public-private partnership. Common types of PPP models are given here. I don't need to go over them again. Design, build, maintain, design, build. Barrister Ifeanyi Anago has done brilliantly well on this. Hakim Smith has also touched so much on those areas. So we don't need to waste time on that at all. The roles of stakeholders in provision of infrastructure through public-private partnership in Nigeria. A stakeholder is defined as a person or organization with a legitimate interest in a given situation, action, or enterprise. In PPP projects, stakeholders may be classified into internal or external. The two parties that are to sign the agreements are the internal. Their own representatives or agents are also part of them. But then, there are external stakeholders who may jeopardize the success of the scheme. The AJA project must have been signed, the concession must be signed between the government agency and the private sector investor. But then even as the two of them are cooperating, the external stakeholders will come in and to make sure that it doesn't work. So that is why stakeholder management is a key consideration in PPP projects anywhere. So you have to make sure the interests of all and sundry are balanced, be them internal or external. If they are not, they will now come up to ensure that they don't allow that project to succeed. And we shall see in a more serious manner as we move forward. Now, the internal stakeholders are the public sector officers and employees who are directly or indirectly connected with the PPP project and bidders in the procurement process. External stakeholders, on the other hand, include banks, investment funds, multilateral funders, public service organizations, and so on and so forth. So here, the take is that even if they are external, stakeholders are key, and their interests must be taken care of. As at the point of conceptualization of the scheme, not after commissioning and handing over, you want to manage that. You manage it